We're at home here in the gardens, and we are installing a beautiful garden paver path. Hey, hi, Glenn here from the workshop at the gardens, and yes, I am at home in the garden, and this has been kind of my big project for the spring, is getting the garden rejuvenated, but now it's time to add the paver path and doing things kind of cool. We are using a new product, to me at least, called a paver base panel. This happens to be the Alliance Gator base, and it's 3/4 inch thick, and that replaces 6 inches of crushed limestone. A whole bunch of cool things I'll talk later in the video about. So I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning where I started to do the excavation on this project. And before we go back and start there, I just wanted to show you one thing. These are the stakes that I'll be working with, and they'll make a lot more sense as you watch. But what I did, and it's hard to see in the little bit video, is I did mark down 4 inches on my line. So what that is going to be is there's going to be 1 inch of sand, the 3/4 inch of the base panel material, and then the paver is 2 3/8, which gets us really close to 4 inches, and that's what we're going to use to set the elevation through here. All right, before we go back and start at the beginning, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and hit that bell so you're notified when part 2 comes out on putting this garden path in. All right, let's go back.
Well, as I mentioned, we are at home in the garden here. I've been a landscape designer, landscape contractor for well over 30 years, and the format of this video that I wanted to present to you is in a DIY homeowner fashion that you can take on this project yourself and not need all the expensive, specialized tools that sometimes you see when installing a paver path in your garden, or even a walkway in your yard, or even all the way up to a patio. The design of this paver walkway path is actually pretty simple. It's a 4-foot wide path that goes through the garden and all the way up to the public sidewalk, where there's a half circle that I'm calling a welcoming circle. We can cover design at another time, but let's just get into putting the patio in. So the first thing that we have to worry about is excavation and getting out the material so we can replace it with the desired material, the pavers. And those stakes that I had mentioned in the beginning, you can see them running kind of in a straight line all the way through the patio. And that mark that I had mentioned was 4 inches down from the top. So the top of the stake is where the finished elevation, the top of the installed pavers will be. Ideally, we want a minimum of 2 inches of drop over 10 feet, or a 2% grade drop. And to achieve this, I set the stakes about 7.5 feet apart. And I took an 8-foot 2x4 and put an 1.5 inch piece of one 2x4 on one end. So that gave me a difference of 1.5 inches over 7.5 feet, which is the 2% grade that we're looking for. I then installed those stakes using a level. When we do the fine tuning, you'll see how I did that exactly. But when we're doing the excavation, we're taking out about 4 inches. We're getting it close. It doesn't need to be perfectly exact. It just needs to be close. Try to be within 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch on your excavation. With the excavation complete, it's time to finish the subbase. And the subbase is what's underneath the fabric, and it brings it up to our elevation. So we're trying to get it very close to that 4-inch grade difference. I'm using a screened pit run sand here, and understand that all sands and aggregates are not exactly the same. They all have little differences. This is directly out of the pit, just screening the larger rocks, 1.5 inch there. We want that different size of sand and little teeny rocks to create a little bit of structure so there's less movement of the soil. Now, one thing you always have to remember, and I almost forgot to put this in, and so it was a last minute addition, is if you're going to have any irrigation or lighting or anything else in the project, make sure that you get your conduit run underneath your pavers. Trust me, it's a pain to come back after after it's all been installed and put a piece of conduit in so you can run things later. So even after 30 years, you almost forget it, but I got it in. That is a good thing. So you can see the stakes right there. We're kind of grading up to that 4-inch mark and using that sand. Something to remember, homeowners and professionals don't even finish projects in all one day or anything. So I'm setting this project up because it's going to take me multiple days to get this project in working by myself. So I'm not looking for exact perfect here. I'm getting close again, within probably 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of that 4-inch mark. Bringing it all up level, using a couple different rakes just to level it all out and get it very close. You can use a 2x4, a piece of wood to double check your raking, and as you can see, it just get it nice and level all the way across. After doing this for 30 years, you kind of get a good feel what is level. So you may need to take some extra steps just to set some 6-foot level on there, or a piece of wood to start to feel that it's level. And then it's time for our friend, and this is the hand packer. And this replaces the big huge jumping jack or the tampers that are out there, but this is sufficient for a garden path. It will take a little bit longer. It will give you some nice upper cardio workout, there's no doubt about that. But with the sand being wet, and you've probably seen me putting a lot of water on this, it's always important to keep the water, the materials wet. So you're going to always see me spraying things down and really keeping them wet. Well, it's the beginning of a new day. It's probably been a week or more since I've worked on the project, but here we are again, putting that water down, re-wetting all of that sub-base material. That water just helps things compact. It acts as a lubricant between the small little grains of sand and the small little rocks and allows everything to get nice and compacted. All right, there's the 2x4, the 8-foot 2x4 that I mentioned. If you look down at the end, that's where you can see the piece of 2x4 that was screwed to the bottom, giving us that 1.5 inch difference. And if you set the level on top, then it becomes nice and level, and you get that 1.5 inch drop, that 2% grade that we need for that surface moisture to move away. A very easy way for a homeowner to just set a nice simple grade. And we're also working in a garden, so we don't need to have it perfect as if we were working on a patio by the house or a sidewalk or something on that line. But we are going to take a fair amount of time and just level out this sub base. This is the time where it needs to be nice and clean. And when you're abutting up to an existing element, such as the sidewalk, the city sidewalk there, those elements are not always perfect. So I needed to go in and put a clean line on there. There was some concrete hanging over on the bottom, and you don't want to hit that off with a hammer because that's how you chip and underscore. You do want to cut that. That's one of the things that you can get at a rental. That's probably one of 2 power tools that I used on this project. Now it's time, because that sub base is all nice and level. This is where we're going to start putting in a geotextile, a fabric between the sub base and our next layer. Recommended to use a non-woven textile and at least 4 ounce in strength. A heavier textile, and that's just gonna keep everything together and not allow cross-contamination of materials. So all of this sand, which is different than the sand below, to stay in place. Important here, you need to overlap. So I'm overlapping 6, some will say up to 12 inches, but a minimum of 6-inch overlap between the pieces of fabric. And the next extremely important part is that you want that fabric to go up the sides and actually extend at least a foot, because we're going to be folding that fabric back over, kind of like we're making a quesadilla or something. We're folding that fabric back over on itself, and we want it to trap all of the sand inside and not allow it to migrate or move out. This particular sand is what we're going to call washed wash sand, and it's going to be a little bit finer. It's still going to have a a mixture of all sizes in there, so do not use playground sand, do not use that fine sand. We want a little bit of structure. So washed concrete sand is what this is called, and pretty easy to find at just about any landscape supply center. There you go again with that water. Now we're using a couple of poles. We need to have our sand put in, and I'm setting it at 1 inch, so somewhere either 3/4 or 1 inch. And this is going to be another difference between installing a paver base panel to a regular paver installation, is we are going to be compacting that sand. So you're going to see me water it down again after I use those poles, kind of get my 1 inch set there. I will come back and then use my hand tamper again and pack that sand down, because we want all of the to be nice and compacted. We want all the little air spaces out, and that's going to give kind of our final bed for putting the Gator base down, the paver base panel down. So this is where you want to spend some time. There's a lot of areas in a whole project where you really need to pay attention, pretty much all of them. But everything from here up will reflect exactly what's left here. So as smooth as you can get the sand in this is what's going to show on the pavers. So pull out those rails, put a little sand in there, wet it down, and hand pack it again. All right, somewhat the joys of working by yourself. The days get a little bit longer, but it's the time we've been waiting for. We're starting to install some of the base panel. And what I'm doing, remember I mentioned that, you know, when you abut up to other elements, you're dealing with those sets. So I'm feathering in a little bit more sand, packing it in with that trowel, and just getting it leveled so it has a nice transition from the city sidewalk onto that welcoming circle. All right, this is going to be, you know, about how far we get in part 1 of installing a garden paver path using a paver base panel. This is the Gator base panel. And part 2 will pick up kind of from the panels and explain a lot more about installing the panels and then the pavers and finishing off the walk. But you can see the sand is nice and smooth, and you'll see that I pulled over that fabric, that extra foot of fabric, and that gets tucked in underneath the panel and kind of creates a whole capsule for that sand so it doesn't move away. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the bell so you're notified when part 2 comes out. And part 2, as I mentioned, will take us all the way to the end of the project and showing you the final pavers. But a great project here, and please leave me any questions down below in the comments, and I'd love to answer them. I'll put a few links in the descriptions about what this product is and other projects that I've done that would be beneficial for you to watch. So that's it. Don't be afraid to take on a nice project in your yard as a DIY homeowner installation. That's going to do it for part 1 of this 2-part video series. Once again, thanks for watching and enjoy.